but you will just steer for it anyway. Full steam ahead. Why? Because you want to sink. You gave up.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the number one listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. Radio.
Take a look around, kid. What do you see? Homes being foreclosed. People working 2-3 jobs just to put food on the table and still drowning in debt. Don't get me wrong. This country is founded on great ideals and principles. They've all been ruined by the banks. Open your eyes to the banks that are robbing you. You know who my favorite president was? Who? Thomas Jefferson. Because he saw all of this coming and tried to stop it. He fought the banks. JFK too, and they killed him for it. The banking institution is more dangerous than an army, he said. He also said that every generation needs a revolution, Jimmy. The American dream is just that. Just a dream. War is a continuation of politics, only by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. This is our bank. This is our war. And this is our plan of attack.
Banks have become an essential threat to our democracy. So consider this justice.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the number one listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio! The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome to Sacred Matrix, a divine paradigm of love and universal consciousness, with your host, Janet Kira Lessin and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Together, we transform the world.
And now, here are your hosts, Janet Kira and Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at revolution.radio. And I'm your host, Janet Kira Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lessin, and my producer, Thomas Becker. And today, our special guest is Andrew-d-Basiago. And here he comes. Andy's been with us many times on many shows over the years, and we look forward to his latest update on information he is wanting to tell us. So, Dr. Lessin, what would you like to say about Andrew-Basiago?
Well, Andrew is one of the sharpest minds I've ever encountered, and he has basically identified the trend toward despotism, this Mussolini-type despotism. He calls it McCarthy-ism, because in the United States this is an example of how you can, without any factual basis at all, smear the people who are most likely to cause change in the structure that is different than what the people on top dictate. And so we're going to get this incredible analysis on this very, very serious problem about what's left of our democracy, this growing McCarthy-ism. And he's going to look at some of the people that have been targeted by this force that deliberately ruins reputations of people that might democratize the society in any way. The data will talk for itself, but Andy has personally known some of the targeted people, like the Clintons, and he's going to be able to tell us about just what's going on and what can be done to save our democracy, or what's left of it. Andy, go ahead.
Hey, Andy. Welcome.
Hi, Janet and Sasha.
Hello.
Hi, Andy. Good to have you on again. So this
Happy
is a
Sunday
very
to you,
controversial. Yes. Yeah, happy Sunday. So this is a very controversial subject, and I'm sure it's going to piss off a lot of people, but it's something we need to begin the dialogue. And we may not have all the answers, but we're here at least putting it out on the table for discussion, and this will probably be the first of many discussions. So, would you like to, Sasha has some questions. What do you want to do first, guys? You want to lay down the foundation, and then Sasha, he's got...
I would really like to hear, about this sort of, how a society winds up with such hate going on that there's no possibility of rationally debating the content. It becomes whose side you're on, and it's really so pernicious that if we don't address McCarthy-ism, someone said there was only democracy in the United States very briefly when U.S. Grant was the president of the United States and black people could really vote. Since then, they have been denied their right to vote again, basically when the U.S. troops were withdrawn, by conventions that prevent democracy. And Andy ran for president, and his program, if it's followed, would have given us a real democracy that worked. And that for me has been the blueprint of what I've wanted. It's like crystallized in your 100 points, Andy. They're just that's what we'd like this country to be, but that isn't what it is.
Right. Well, I maybe first we could start with sort of defining what McCarthyism is. McCarthyism is the practice of, I was just thinking this afternoon, sort of cobbling together my own definition, but I think just the essential aspect of McCarthyism, that it's a form of political warfare that resorts to blanket allegations of notorious wrongdoing to stigmatize and damage the reputation of one's political adversaries, rather than competing with them intellectually based on sound public policy analysis. It's a toxin in our democratic society where we have freedom of speech in the press, or at least have had more freedom of speech in the press than other countries, that essentially abuses our First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and the press to use politics and to try to win advantage in politics through vilification of one's adversaries. It owes its name to Senator Joseph McCarthy, who was a Republican senator from Wisconsin, who in the 1940s and even more so in the 1950s created quite a reputation for himself and became quite powerful by accusing many people of being communists without any evidence and really, quite frankly, without any reality. And it wasn't until he was challenged by attorney Joseph Welch on the grounds of basic humanity at the Army McCarthy hearings. I believe Welch was an attorney, a committee attorney for the Senate, that McCarthy's demagogic attempt to usurp the public policy arena in our country by utilizing this technique failed, and then he was denounced by CBS newsman Edward R. Murrow, and the country essentially realized that he was a demagogue who was abusing this technique to accumulate power to himself, and was really damaging the country.
Did he send Ethel Rosenberg to die and she was innocent?
Well, certainly Julius and Ethel Rosenberg can be counted among the victims of McCarthyism because their lack of loyalty was presumed. The notion that they were Soviet spies who had traded atomic secrets was never proved. They went to their deaths by execution, denying that they were Soviet spies or agent provocateurs within the United States. There was a background of anti-Semitism to their very targeting. And that's an apt example. I didn't think about the Rosenbergs, but certainly in addition to the Rosenbergs' loss of their lives, there were thousands of lives destroyed, hundreds of suicides, many careers destroyed by McCarthyism, which is really the opposite of the way that a healthy democracy functions. In a healthy democracy, you recognize the common citizenship of even your political adversaries, and you listen to their position, and you either agree with them out of the notion that they've made a sound argument, or you offer a better argument. You tear at the foundations of democracy when you rest your political style on simply damaging the reputation of your adversaries. And I realized when I look back at the falsehoods that were circulated about me, both before and during the time that I ran for president, how common they were to the false claims that have been made against William Jefferson Clinton and Hillary Rodham Clinton. And I started to piece together a larger pattern that I'm now calling the new McCarthyism. We are definitely in a McCarthyite era where false allegations of sexual deviance, pedophilia, and mass murder, particularly mass murder carried out in the context of Satanism, have replaced communism as the boogaboo of the McCarthyism that's being practiced. So today we had talked about discussing who's doing the targeting, who's being targeted, what's being alleged, how common it is that it's the same scenarios all the time, how this is done on the basis of no evidence, entirely contrary to the doctrine that any one of us is presumed guilty, is presumed innocent of wrongdoing before being proven guilty of wrongdoing. And that, for that matter, if you're going to discuss allegations of criminal or moral wrongdoing in a democracy, such matters are only valid to discuss when there is either clear and convincing evidence or somebody is under indictment by some prosecutorial authority. The kind of McCarthyism that's going on now is so blatant and so systemic, and it's been fueled by the advent of the internet and all the amateur journalism that's being practiced on the internet, and it's not being answered because it's so outrageous. So there's a pattern among the targeted people to not even issue official denials, which actually damages your reputation by doing that, because it makes a public matter of the allegations. But at the same time, we're losing sight of the fact that the establishment media is losing market share all the time. The newspapers, the television stations. I mean, essentially, the 2016 election turned on people getting their news from their smartphones, not from television and not from the large metropolitan newspapers. So we're missing the fact that a new form of media is emerging. There's much more alternative media, but that media, I'm sorry to say, it's really, as somebody who began his career in journalism, I'm really saddened by what's happened. We had the opportunity to create ethical, non-establishment journalism, and what emerged instead was toxic alternative journalism, where the most outrageous things are being said about people on the basis of no evidence, and they're presumed to be true because there's a new sort of demon-haunted world, to borrow a phrase from Carl Sagan, where there's an assumption that if somebody is alleged to be guilty of some very heinous act, it must be true. And that practice began not with Joseph McCarthy, but with Adolf Hitler. It was Adolf Hitler who observed that while people are generally reluctant to believe a small lie, that if you make a big lie and allege something outrageous about somebody, the very outrageousness of the content of the allegation, human nature being what it is, causes the big lie to be believed. I've had the big lie practiced against me, and I wanted to go into what I've done for the country and yet how I was treated by the new McCarthyism. And I also want to make some analogies between my experience and the Clintons and other effective Democrats, because that seems to be the class of political actor that has been targeted, not just in our own time, but even historically. There has been an effort to damage the reputations of long dead Democrats. So I was hoping we could draw some analogies there, because we haven't had a national discussion about this fact that even the indiscretion of long dead presidents and other leaders is being carried out against Democrats, but not Republicans. And I want to cite some of the examples of that. But I'm very concerned that we're going to lose our democracy because people of sound judgment and great talent are going to avoid becoming politicians and public servants, because you could almost say that you can't do so today without being accused of outrageous things that you've never done, and propensities that do not obtain, propensities that do not apply to oneself. Meanwhile, while people of known immoral propensities, if they're in one party versus the other, their immoral propensities and past acts are ignored and covered up by the major parties, particularly on the Republican side. So really, we're in sort of this free fire zone where the very act of doing something that demonstrates high citizenship, which is trying to run for public office, involves immediate besmirchment of the candidate, not just a rejection of their policy positions, but essentially this groundless castigation of their very merit as a human being. And this is extremely corrosive of government and of our country. And I felt compelled to speak out. And I thank both of you very much for giving me a platform today to start to articulate the pattern that I've observed. So I was hoping we could go into some of the details of that.
Make it about the person and what side the person's on, rather than the content of what they're doing. But what really distresses me is now it's uncovered that the Russian government, for example, has influenced American politics, just as the Spanish government had Aaron Burr and its employ influencing our government. So this is a real fiddling.
Yeah. Sasha, before we start going in search of dragons to destroy, because it's possible it could be coming from some kind of disinformation campaign being run by one or several foreign governments. But I thought we would just identify some of the patterns first. Let me start with, since most American politicians have been male, let's start with allegations of promiscuity and womanizing, allegations of excessive heterosexual sexual activity by American male politicians. Let's be frank. There are only 3 presidents in which the entire discourse on promiscuous presidents have rested. They were the allegations against one of our earliest Democrats, in fact, one of the founders of the Democratic Party, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson founded the Democratic Party with James Madison when they were on a butterfly catching expedition on Hudson River. And it's the oldest American political party and the most populist. Now, the first major American leader was a president and a Democrat, Jefferson, and we focused on his affair with the mulatto woman of his era, Sally Hemings, and much was made of that, but it was never emphasized that she was considered one of the great beauties of her generation, a very desirable young woman, and Jefferson's wife was sick and ultimately died when they were not that elderly. I believe they were in their 40s. So Jefferson was seeking the companionship of Sally Hemings, not being promiscuous. He just developed an interpersonal relationship with a black woman, which was very progressive for his time. And so there were books written on the Jefferson-Sally Hemings affair, despite the fact that he would soon be a widower because of his wife's illness. The second major American leader where we focused on promiscuity by an alpha male were the books that were written describing the sex life of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, not the third, but the 35th president of the United States. There has been an allegation that he was involved in 32 affairs while president, but wait a minute. Right before serving as president, John F. Kennedy served as the senator from one of the senators from Massachusetts, and he spent much of his Senate career entering the Senate office building where his office was on crutches from his Addison's disease. He had adrenal cancer. He also had a major back injury from saving one of his men, O'Brien, by clenching a strap to his life preserver during the PT-109 disaster. John F. Kennedy was a naval hero who, after his PT boat was sliced in half by a Japanese destroyer, saved 11 of his men, even one of them by clenching the strap to his life preserver, O'Brien's life preserver, in his teeth, and swimming 3 miles to safety. It was written up in major newspapers. It was a legitimate story of valor during World War II. As a result of the injuries from that event, John F. Kennedy wore a lower back brace for the rest of his life. He also was so sick from adrenal cancer, from Addison's disease, that he was given the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church 3 times before being nominated for president in 1960. It's really a miracle that JFK reached the White House, given his illness. So there's no question that John F. Kennedy was a handsome and charismatic young man, a dashing young man who was very attractive to women. He seemed to be quite a flirt, and it's pretty clear he had extramarital affairs. But his actual sex life could not have been as robust as it's been made out to be, because he was in a back brace and he was suffering from adrenal cancer, not just as president, but as a senator for 10 years before that, or eight years before receiving the Democratic nomination for president. Even his secretary, Mrs. Lincoln, commented about that, but that's never quoted. She said, Jack was popular with the ladies, but I can't believe he was as active with the ladies as he's been made out to be, because people forget how sick he was. One of my former professors at UCLA, Robert Dallek, followed up Seymour Hersh's The Dark Side of Camelot with a book entitled John F. Kennedy, An Unfinished Life. And Professor Dallek really described how sick John F. Kennedy was during his public career. So it's doubtful that he had as robust a sex life as was alleged. Now, the only other major American figure to reach the presidency and have his alleged promiscuity as a straight male become a storied part of American culture and gossip was a third activist Democrat of tremendous efficacy. And I think we have to point this out. And as somebody who's aspired to the presidency and who met Bill Clinton when I was a child, I want to talk about Bill Clinton in this context. But the third are all the allegations that have been made about President Clinton. According to the new McCarthy-ism, President Clinton is a serial rapist. Those are very strong words. They're the words, for example, of people practicing the new McCarthy-ism like Roger Stone. But wait a minute. Bill Clinton entered the political mainstream at age 25, 26, when he was the Texas organizer for George McGovern in 1972. Prior to that, he had attended Georgetown University, Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, and Yale Law School, in an era in which feminism, the second wave of feminism, was emerging in the country. And he married a feminist who was really the most remarkable political woman of her generation, Hillary Rodham. I really think it's doubtful that Bill Clinton is the serial rapist he's made out to be. Certainly also when you start to look at the long-term relationships he had a relationship with his cousin, Dolly Browning, and he had an affair with a Miss America, Elizabeth Ward Grayson, neither of whom ever alleged rape or any kind of sexual impropriety beyond the fact that they were in extramarital relationships with Bill Clinton. Okay, so those are the three American presidents who have been isolated in our time, even though obviously Jefferson has been dead since 1826, July 4th, 1826. Now, what can we say about the other presidents? Well, they never talk about the fact that Abraham Lincoln is known to have had a probable homosexual relationship with a young man named Joshua Speed. Now, Lincoln's time, the time of Walt Whitman, was one where there was relative toleration of same-sex relationships by men and women, but there was also a kind of a tradition of buddyship, kind of as exists in Australia, where men had really close personal friends, really close buddies that they were not sexually involved with, but were just friends with. So we don't really know whether Abraham Lincoln was a bisexual. We know that he did father 4 children with Mary Todd Lincoln, Willie, Edward, Tad, and Robert Todd Lincoln. It was never disputed that they were sired by Abraham Lincoln, so he clearly, at least inside his marriage, was living the life of a straight male and fathering children. But there is this lingering question whether Lincoln had a boyfriend, was a bisexual, and was in a homosexual relationship with Joshua Speed, who he slept with for 6 years of his adulthood. Now, I'm an admirer of Lincoln. I think he was one of our greatest presidents. When I was running for president, I was saying to people, hey, listen, I'm aspiring to have the job that people like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy had. You realize what you're going to give me if you give me the opportunity to be your president? The highest privilege in the country. Okay, so I've never really explored whether Lincoln had an alternative sexual aspect to his sex life. But here's the deal. Nobody else has either. Why? Because Lincoln was a Republican. And let me cite this negative pattern of not using McCarthyism, of claims of sexual aberrance against Republicans. We hear about the heterosexual dalliances of Jefferson, Kennedy, and Clinton, but they never retell the story of the affair that a Republican president, Warren Harding, had that almost cost him re-election. We hear about the cross-dressing and homosexuality of an FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, which was true. He was gay. But we never hear any exploration by journalists or political activists about the transvestism that some people reported in the life of a Republican president by the name of Richard Milhous Nixon. According to my sources, and I don't talk about this because I'm a tolerant individual. I don't believe people's sex lives should become political matters as long as they're carried out within some bounds of discretion and aren't damaging their performance. But according to Ace Hayes of the Portland Free Press, now deceased, Richard Nixon was a cross-dresser who frequently wore a black chiffon dress to relax, even as president. Now, that probably one good reason that's never become the political football that Jefferson's extramarital affair with Sally Hemings has, or John F. Kennedy's girlfriends, or Bill Clinton's assignations, is that there was no testimony to that effect that ever stuck. But it was alleged, and for that matter, Harding's affair was the Monica Lewinsky scandal of his administration. But how is it then that we never hear about it? Well, yes, he was a more obscure president than Jefferson, Kennedy, or Clinton, but I think we never hear about it. Harding's affair, or possibly the transvestism of Richard Nixon, something that psychologists say and sexologists say 15% of straight men practice, namely cross-dressing, because he was a Republican president. Because look, the people who are being accused of sexual deviance, of mass murder, and of pedophilia fit a pattern. They're people like Jefferson, Kennedy, Clinton, and I dare say myself. They're bright, knowledgeable, articulate, effective, and Democrat. We have been the targets of this kind of vilification. Vilification that has involved false allegations and the exaggeration of true patterns in people's lives. So, for example, before I ever became a public figure or ran for president, Stephen Colbert, who just confronted President Clinton about not apologizing to Monica Lewinsky, a young adult who he was in a consensual relationship with and did not rape. She was a colleague he had a consensual affair with. Okay. Stephen Colbert agreed to do an interview with me about how my teleportation proposal could alleviate American reliance on overseas oil. And instead, they filmed a bunch of film with me where I was talking about that, and then did a hit piece in the nature of their stock in trade, which is comedy, in which I, as a heterosexual, was falsely accused of being the gay lover of another prominent Democrat, Barack Obama, the President of the United States. So let me underscore my interest in the new McCarthyism. I am a former American astronaut. I helped the United States pioneer time travel when I was a small child. Then during my college years, I was a direct participant in the secret space program, and I traveled to Mars at the risk of my life around 40 times round trip. I am a former American astronaut, and yet when I came forward with my account of the Mars Jump Room program, which included Barack Obama, the response of the new McCarthyism was to allege that I was his gay lover. Is that how John Glenn was treated? John Glenn was given a ticker tape parade in New York City 2 days after going around the Earth in a space capsule on February 20th of 1962. 2 days later, he rode with the president through New York City in an ocean of confetti. Under the new McCarthyism, somebody can go much further in space, and 35 years later, their reward is not a ticker tape parade in New York City, but a false allegation as a straight male that they're not only gay, but have had an affair with the President of the United States. That's how far this vilification has gone. Okay, it's gotten to the point where there's no room for heroism, and where there's not a targeting of people based on indiscretion. There's clear targeting based on complete, not even exaggeration. It's just allegations are made up out of whole cloth. Now, what I find so conspicuous about, let's say, that fact, the fact that the Colbert Report falsely accused me of being gay and having an affair with Obama, rather than going to Mars with Obama, which was the real story, and the obfuscation inherent in that, is the fact that when I ran for president, I didn't really fight that allegation because it wasn't true. I am an avowed heterosexual, and I can produce the former girlfriends to prove it. But I found it conspicuous that there was somebody vying for the Republican nomination for president who was a former gay stripper. His name is Senator Marco Rubio, and we never heard that. So I think this is demonstrative of the new McCarthyism. As a Democrat, and as an activist Democrat with an actual plan for the country, not one of tax and spend, but my 100 proposals encompass a new agenda for a new America. Before running for president, I was falsely accused of being gay and having an affair with the sitting president, which is certainly a very unsavory thing to allege against anybody who's straight and has had a straight sex life. And yet there was a former gay stripper running for the Republican nomination, Marco Rubio, and nobody touched it. I didn't touch it because, quite frankly, I'm not a homophobe. If he had a season of sin in his youth and was gay and then married a woman and had kids, or was a stripper and then cleaned up his act, more power to him. I'm certainly not somebody who's going to allege that there haven't always been people in society with the same-sex attraction. I think we demonstrate that we're an evolved country when we destigmatize gay people, because they've always been with us. Come on. Alexander the Great was gay, okay? Get with the program. I mean, some people have always been gay. It's an evolved country that can recognize that anthropologically and not make an issue of it, and give gay people the same rights that straight people enjoy, like the right to marry. Okay? So I actually stated that during the campaign. I actually supported gay marriage right before the Supreme Court decision, stating that any decision contrary to that would work a suspect class and wouldn't pass muster under the Equal Protection Clause.
Yes,
but I just find it more than passing strange that allegations of what has long been held to be sexual deviance are made falsely against Democrats, and yet the gay propensities of Republicans are not discussed even when they're seeking the highest office in the land. There's a word for that, and it's called hypocrisy. It's not fair play. And that's the tenor of politics today.
Well, you could just tell them that, if you're going to keep this stuff up, I'm going to tell stuff I know about you and the sheep. So you Republicans, watch out. It's obvious that the Republicans are liked by whoever's financing this, and Democrats are disliked, especially the ones that could be very progressive like you.
Well, they start in with allegations of sexual wrongdoing. In the case of Hillary Clinton, when they were president and first lady, the Clintons, the first thing that was alleged against Hillary is in a peak of anger, she had hurled a marble ashtray at a Secret Service agent. Now, I thought about that allegation. I thought, well, if you're under constant protection by the Secret Service, even while, going to the bathroom, or when you're in bed making love to your partner, or just whatever, having a private life, there must be times when it's irksome to get so much interference in your private life. So I kind of thought, even if that story is true, I can see where she lost her temper. Maybe she had said to the Secret Service agent, I need some private time right now. Please stay in the hallway. And they had come into a bedroom or something, and she threw a marble ashtray at the door, right? Okay. So that was the first thing that was alleged. And then I remember when I was a student at Cambridge in 1995, a British student, commented to me as if I was, an American politico, as it were. I guess he read me pretty correctly. He said, Hillary Clinton, had a lesbian relationship with actress Margie Post. So when she was first lady, they were already making claims of sexual deviance by Hillary, even though she was married to a man and had a daughter by President Clinton or Webb Hubbell or Vince Foster or somebody, namely Chelsea. It was never disputed that Hillary Rodham was pregnant with Chelsea around 1980 and had Chelsea right when when President Clinton was elected governor the first time. Okay, so it went from throwing an ashtray to being a lesbian. And then when she ran for president, she was then accused of being in a lesbian relationship with her aide, Huma Abedin. And now that she's run for president as the first American woman to do something extraordinary in a patriarchal society with a patriarchal leadership tradition, Hillary Rodham Clinton earned her props. I don't agree with everything she believes in or stands for, but as a student of American history, I have to be fair, and I have to identify her as a great American. I'm doing so as one of her political adversaries in 2016. She did something exceptional with her life. She became the first woman to secure a major party nomination for president. That was unprecedented. She will go down in history as a significant American woman and American. And she earned that. She earned that over a career. Now, why do I have a special regard for Madam Secretary Clinton. Because when I was 7 years old, I was camping with my family, and we were driving up from New Jersey to Moosehead Lake, Maine. This was in August of 1969. I was all of 7 years old. And it was incredibly hot. That was the month, August of 1969 was the month when Neil Diamond recorded his album Hot August Night. It was insufferably hot on the East Coast during major parts of August 1969. There was a major heat wave. And my father turned to my mother in our station wagon and said, "Hun, where should we stop?" And she said, "Anywhere, Ray. I think I'm going to die if you don't pull over." So my dad ended up, rather than going all the way to Moosehead Lake in north central Maine, or the center of Maine, he stopped at a state campground a couple miles over the Maine border. That was really just several acres of crabgrass. And as was his practice, my dad used to call me Gunga Din when we were camping. My chore was getting water for my family of 7. I was the youngest, and I was hauling some pretty heavy water as a pretty small guy. So my dad gave me our red plastic 5-gallon water jug, and said, "Andy, go down to the water spigot and get some water. We're all dehydrated. We're going to be needing it." So I went down to the water spigot in this campground that was really the most unceremonious campground we ever camped at in a family for 15 years of camping together. It was just, as I mentioned, just basically a couple of acres of crabgrass with a water spigot and some places where you could pitch your tent. Down at the water spigot were 3 college girls. The girls would later come into our tent in the middle of the night when the heat wave abated, with a huge electric storm that seemingly was right over our campground. It was the thunder was booming that night like we were in a Civil War battle. And 2 young women among the 3 of them who were washing their hair down at the water spigot, Hillary and Chris, came into our tent and asked for my father's help in setting their tent back up. It had fallen down in the rainstorm. This sudden inundation of water that was sort of pouring down on the campground. Now, the 3 girls at the water spigot were Hillary Rodham, Chris Olson, and another Wellesley College student named Martha. I think it may have been the woman who became known as Martha Teichner after she married, who went on to a distinguished career as a foreign correspondent for CBS News. Hillary, of course, went on to her political career. Chris Olson would marry Jeff Rogers, the son of Nixon's Secretary of State William P. Rogers, the chair of the Rogers Commission into the Challenger disaster, and become a city attorney in Portland and become my crim law professor and dean of students, and really the den mother for my Chinese girlfriend when I was in law school, somebody I knew personally and was a lifelong friend of the Clintons, who is a wonderful individual, Chris Olson Rogers, as she was then known. So I take the 5-gallon jug down there as a 7-year-old, and the oldest of the 3 girls, Hillary, starts quizzing me in a motherly way about, did I know how much 5 gallons of water weighed? Did I know how much I weighed? And I said 50 pounds. And she said, "Do you realize you're fetching water that you're only 10 pounds heavier than?" She was kind of educating me, and she said, "How do you do that?" And I said, "Well, usually I just drag it on the ground." And she said, "You must, because you're only 50 pounds, and it's 40 pounds. Do you realize that?" And we talked about their school, Wellesley, and my dad's alma mater, which was Lehigh University. And what I really was struck by, and when I think about now about that brief encounter with Hillary and her girlfriends from Wellesley, they were on their way to Lake Champlain. In fact, we followed them to Lake Champlain because we had never camped there, and they were talking up Lake Champlain when they came over to our campsite the next day after the rainstorm. But when I look back on that brief encounter with Hillary at 22, this young lawyer who would go on to found the Children's Defense Fund with a great American, Marion Wright Edelman, I thought, she was really showing a motherly concern for my well-being. And here, after becoming the first woman to be nominated by a major party for president of the United States, she's being accused of being a satanic serial killer. A man by the name of David Zublin has put a piece on YouTube under the brand Truth Unsealed, in which he alleges that there was a video that was released on the dark web showing Hillary and her aide Huma Abedin cutting a girl's face off. And I thought, well, that's an extraordinary thing to claim about somebody. I'm sure there are wicked people in the world who do that. I mean, there are people who die from homicides, and there are situations where homicide victims are tortured to death before being killed. There have been fairly solid allegations of satanic ritual murder just recently, to include the really moving account given in a 4-part YouTube by the Dutch banker Ronald Bernard, in which he was alleging satanic ritual murder as sort of a form of disciplining of people, inducing their obedience to authority in the banking industry, but mentioned no American politicians as being either Satanists or ritual murderers. But he alleged that this video on the dark web showed Hillary and Huma cutting a 13-year-old girl's face off, but then admonished the viewers that he couldn't show it because downloading it and holding it was child pornography, and it was illegal to download it or hold it as a video. And he also admonished the viewers not to do so themselves. Now, look, if you can accuse somebody of an atrocity and simultaneously say to your listeners or your viewers, but don't go in search of verification, don't look for any irrefutable evidence, don't look for any evidence, because if you do, you'll be indicted yourself. You can accuse anybody of anything. You could accuse somebody of killing Santa Claus, just to frame a kind of a Vincent Bugliosi-esque phraseology here, right? It's ridiculous to accuse somebody. It's totally indefensible to accuse anybody, a public figure or a private citizen, of a heinous atrocity, and then say, you've got to rely on my say-so because you can't go in search of legal proof of this alleged crime.
That's a lot. That sounds like a libel. Andy, isn't that libel to talk stink about somebody like that and to make up shit?
Well, certainly in many states, in fact, alleging that somebody has committed a crime involving moral turpitude is what's known as slander per se, in which you don't have to prove actual damages to win monetary damages from the court. Strict liability obtains. Now, with public figures, this is one of the reasons the new McCarthyism has flourished, because the Supreme Court erred in valuing a public figure's reputation as a lesser thing than a private citizen's reputation. Under New York Times v. Sullivan, in order to sustain a defamation charge when you have sought the limelight and become a public figure, you have to show intentional or reckless disregard for the truth, not just that something is defamatory and was said, or was even under an intentional or knowing standard. So when you are a public figure...
Yeah, you can still prove, look, I didn't do these things because here's what I was doing. I can document everything I did.
But under the American system of justice, if you can't prove your accuser has shown an intentional or reckless disregard for the truth, even if they have defamed you, in fact, you cannot prevail in a defamation action against them. In other words, the U.S. Supreme Court in New York Times v. Sullivan essentially degraded the right of Americans who are public figures to preserve their good name. And this was one of the preconditions legally to the new McCarthyism. Okay, now, I believe the following. I believe the claim that Hillary Clinton is a Satanist and a ritual killer are both false. I believe that as an intellectual in her generation, she might have explored other belief systems, maybe studied Wicca or magic. But I believe that the only way the young woman I met, who cared so much about me when I met her when I was 7 and she was a 22-year-old recent college grad, who, by the way, had just made Life magazine on the strength of her commencement address. She actually showed up Massachusetts Senator Edward Brooke, who was then the leading African-American political figure, by her brilliant commencement speech at Wellesley just a few months before we met her there in August of '69 at the campsite in Maine. I believe that that person would have had to have been replaced to have grown up and become a satanic ritual murder. What I'm saying is, I got a wonderful vibe from her as a psychic, sensitive 7-year-old who would soon be time traveling and doing psychic readings for the Office of Naval Intelligence. Okay, I was extremely tuned into adults, and I got a great vibe from her. She even said to her girlfriends at the campsite there, "Look at this lad. He has the face of an angel, a Botticelli angel," which is what Mother Cabrini said to my grandmother in their generation. Mother Cabrini walked past my grandmother when she was a teenager and put her hand on my grandmother's cheek. And she said, "You, young lady, have the face of an angel." That's what Hillary Rodham said of me as a 7-year-old. Look at this lad. He has the face of an angel, a Botticelli angel. That is not the statement of somebody destined to be cutting kids' faces off. Okay, now the second reason I don't believe that allegation gets to the Clintons.
Wait, Andy, wait, before you go beyond that, wow, you made a statement, if she hasn't been replaced. And so I know that you don't say things lightly. That was an allusion to the possibility that she has been replaced, and it was a different Hillary than the one you actually knew and felt.
There's substantive information. I don't know whether it's true or not. Certainly my fellow lawyer and friend Tina Foster had developed this to pretty great effect in her book, The Splitting Image, that particular public people have been replaced, including Joseph Stalin, Saddam Hussein, Werner von Braun, and CIA Director Alan Dulles. So the point I'm making is, if Hillary was replaced by somebody else or something else, then I could see an opening to such allegations against her being true. But the point I'm making is, if there was actual continuity between the Hillary Rodham that I met when she was 22 and I was 7, 49 years ago, okay, in 1969, if she was not replaced by some wicked person, then I don't believe that person I met could have grown up and become a serial killer. Okay, it's just not possible. Okay, now let me describe my contact with Bill Clinton as a child. I crossed paths with Bill Clinton twice in childhood, and with far less serendipity than I crossed paths with Hillary. You may recall from my time travel account that in approximately 1970, I'm not sure whether it was several years before that or a little bit after that, but when I was around 9 or 10 years old, I was present at a lunch in New Mexico that was held for a young Bill Clinton by Project Pegasus after they had detected and briefed him on his future presidency, on his destiny as president, as it were. And I sat next to a young Bill Clinton on his right, when on his left, in a small table at La Hacienda restaurant in Albuquerque, sat Dr. Harold M. Agnew, who was then director of the Los Alamos National Lab. So it must have been 1970, which is when Harold became director of LANL. Next to him was Dr. Ivan Browning, who had been director of science and technology for the CIA since 1959, a position he would hold until 1974. And then my late father, Raymond F. Basiago, and his colleague, Joseph Conason, who were employees of the Ralph M. Parsons Engineering Company, and they were linked to the CIA's involvement in time travel through their employment at Parsons. My father, because he was the most knowledgeable engineer in the country on Tesla teleportation, which he studied when he was an engineer at the Thomas A. Edison Research Laboratory in West Orange, New Jersey from 1956 to 64. Okay, so those were the 5 people around the table around Clinton. I was on his right, and then Agnew, Browning, my father, and Conason were over on the left side of the table. And they said, they were asking him questions like, "Well, how are you doing with the information, Bill?" And that's when he said, "Well, fellas, I know you're all associated with the atomic research community. I know you're always doing amazing things like building more destructive nuclear weapons, for example. But some days I get up and I look in the mirror and I have to pinch myself. And I say to myself, me, Bill Clinton, President of the United States, well, fellas, that dog don't hunt. Now, that's what Clinton said in a kind of a self-deprecating way, although apparently he had wanted to be president since he was 16. We remember the power walk to meet JFK in 63. So Clinton was clearly an ambitious young man who wanted to be president even as a young teenager. But he was being self-deprecating with these engineers from Project Pegasus. And but let me tell you what the vibe that I got from Bill Clinton in that lunch. He was the last to arrive at the lunch table, and he kind of snaked his way through the other tables. This rangy, kind of skinny kid. He looked like Woody Guthrie or Bob Dylan. He was so skinny. He could have still maybe even been at Georgetown as an undergraduate. Maybe this was 1968 or 69, and Harold was still director of the weapons division at Lanham. But anyway,
Andy, hold
I
that
got
thought.
the best
We'll be back
vibe off
in
of
5
Bill
minutes.
Clinton.
Andy, we have
well, so we can
commercial break. Be back in 5.
Okay, we
real
can
quick.
pick up with my Bill Clinton's impression on me as a 9-year-old.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
You need some more than speed records in this day and age. You need coverage.
Coverage? Oh, you mean them little root weevils that crawl around popping off cameras in your face?
Those root weevils write history.
Many of you know that quote by Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth. Well, you can, and Event Horizons will give you those truths. So when you're mad as hell and not going to take it anymore from that memorable senior network, you'll know just what to do. We will draw you in and become your news addiction at Event Horizons. Join us Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to noon Eastern Time at freedomslips.com. At Revolution Radio. Our world team members are Dennis Fetcho, John Ilias, David Dunger, Hyla Cass, MD, Melanie Vrichjan, Jim Mars, Paula Harris, John Trallo, Maria Payan, Christopher Husser, DODDS, Jonathan Orchard, and me, your anchor, Dr. Robin Falco.
If you decide not to volunteer, it will not be held against you in any way.
Sounds dangerous.
It is. Very dangerous.
Count me in.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, where information never sleeps. Is your data safe? Do you have the necessary information to assist you in confidently living through just about any survival situation? Is survival and gardening, off-grid living, medical knowledge, or even natural or man-made EMPs on your list of personal concerns? Do you have your documents and your personal information in a safe place in your hands where you know where it is? Well, check out our preloaded EMP-proof thumb drive. Over 3 gigs of survival documents and how-tos, plus the USDA offline food preservation website, and much, much more, including a surprise bonus we just can't tell you about here. With plenty of room left over to store your most important documents. Imagine if a megavirus or a computer failure took out your bank, or all the banks for that matter. Are your banking records safe in your hands? So when they get things fixed and repaired, you can say, hey, look, this is what I had. You have it. I want it back. Is your personal data safe? Family records, addresses, phone numbers? Well, squeeze on over to freedomslips.com. Yes, that's www.freedomslips.com. Click the banner on the homepage for the EMP-proof bullet drive to get the full scoop of everything that we offer. So, folks, keep your data safe for your peace of mind. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Breaking news. A visiting Syrian diplomat reported today that their population is evolving rapidly and advancing into a fifth dimensional consciousness. They are seeking peace with all cosmic cultures, which may mean that the Earth will be asked to join the prestigious Galactic Federation of Light Alliances. Please join Debbie West and Michael Hathaway on Lost Knowledge, Saturdays, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Studio A, for the latest breaking news on the Star Visitors' peaceful contact and the ongoing project of cleansing the Earth.
This is the people's war. It is our war. We are the fighters. Fight it then. Fight it with all that is in us. And may God defend the right.
Warning! Warning!
We've got to stop them! They're going to kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human beings!
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it. Right! You tell them I'm coming! And hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio!
Join Revolution Radio every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Studio B for Momentary Zen with host Zen Garcia at freedomslips.com, the People Station.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
You are live.
Aloha and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution.radio, and I'm your host, Janet Lesson, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha Alex Lesson. And we have andrew-d-basiago with us. We're talking about the modern McCarthy-ism. And before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on Revolution.radio and make your donation this week. $1, $10, $15, $20, $100, $1,000, $1 million, whatever you donate, we will greatly appreciate it. We do need your donations to keep operating. Matt Painter, how are we doing? Are you there? Can anybody hear me?
Yeah, I'm trying to bring it up now.
Oh, okay.
Give me just a second.
No.
Everything was freezing.
Okay, we'll give you a second.
Okay, our goal is 2,600 and we got 1,066, so we really do need your help. It's close to halfway through the month.
Yes, so get over there and make a donation. All right, Andy, we were talking about Bill Clinton. Sasha, do you have anything to say before we go back to Andy?
Okay, just to put it in the context is that we're looking at a first-hand encounter with these two human beings, Bill and Hillary, and you could actually feel them. And then we're looking at the pattern of how somebody who is truly effective, like the Clintons, both of them, is targeted. And just what does this do to having a discussion about issues in this country? What can we do about it?
Right. So just to sort of fill out the anecdote, I'm sitting there in this Mexican restaurant in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I'm just sort of processing the fact that this young man is meeting with these august figures in the atomic research community because he had just previously been apprised of his future presidency. Okay, but what I wanted to say is as I watched him walk into our table, the fifth individual to sit down, and smile and shake hands all around and then handle their questions with such a good nature. I was really struck as a child. I don't really know how old I was. I could have been 8, 9, 10. I was really struck by Bill Clinton, unlike I've been struck by anybody before or since. He was just crackling with goodwill. He was the friendliest, most genial person you could ever meet. Now, I'm a kid. He's like college age. He was this skinny drink of water, kind of looked a little bit like Bob Dylan, a little bit like Woody Guthrie. I could tell he was from the South. He had, of course, an Arkansas accent. But his vibe was remarkably positive. I can see it to this day. He sits down next to me after shaking hands all around, and he was just such a good-natured young man. So smart and so friendly. He just crackled with goodwill. Like it was almost like an electrostatic discharge. He had such an abundant natural endowment of likability, right? Okay. The next time I crossed paths with Bill Clinton was in November of 1972. My father and I were walking into the parking lot in front of the downtown Little Rock Holiday Inn. It was surrounded on four sides by blacktop, as I recall. And there was an Arkansas politician over on our left that was teasing Bill Clinton as Clinton was walking towards us. Nixon had just been reelected, and Clinton apparently, this is about a week after the election, and Clinton apparently was showing up for breakfast at the hotel there after coming back to Little Rock, I'm assuming, after being Texas organizer for McGovern, which was really the beginning of his career in presidential politics. And the Arkansas politician walking next to my father was teasing him by yelling things like, "Hey, Bill, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now that your guy lost?" And Bill Clinton very good-naturedly was laughing all the way as he was walking towards us. And as he did so, on the blacktop there, the macadam parking lot that surrounded, probably still does, surround the downtown Little Rock, Arkansas Holiday Inn, Bill Clinton possessed such personal charisma that I was watching his personal energy field cascade off the ground. What I'm saying is, he's now no longer like college age, but he's now, 25, 26 years old. And I'm watching these darts of energy coming off of him and hitting the ground and cascading to the side. He was that energetic, that charismatic. I didn't recognize him as the young man we had lunch with in Albuquerque, but I've now pieced it together. And he got to the guy, the Arkansas politician, he said, "Well, in fact, I'm going to go back to Yale Law School and finish out." So, of course, he was in Yale at that time when he was working for McGovern in 72. "I'm going to go back to Yale Law School and finish out and then come back here and run for House. And what I want to know from you, Jim," or whatever the guy's name was, "what I want to know from you, Jimmy, is do I have your vote?" And he said that right next to us and shook the man's hand, and he was stomping his feet laughing. He was, again, a completely good-natured soul. He was crackling with goodwill. He was older, a little bit more sophisticated, but he was still the same positive young person. Now, when I think about Bill Clinton as president, well, who was Bill Clinton as president? Yes, there was the Lewinsky scandal, but everything that Bill Clinton bragged about at the 2000 Democratic National Convention was true. What Bill Clinton was, as distinguished from his brilliant wife, was the most effective president of the 20th century and one of the great Democratic presidents in American history. I would dare say one of the most effective presidents in American history. Certainly the most effective president of the 20th century, a century that included Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Dwight David Eisenhower, and John F. Kennedy, for example. He was the only president since FDR, I believe, or maybe even this was not achieved by FDR, but he left office with a surplus. There was the greatest net growth in things like job creation, the government surplus, number of acres of land dedicated to national forest and national monuments and national park land. So he furthered the legacy of Theodore Roosevelt. What I'm saying is, look, if we're going to have a successful democracy, we're going to have to stop lying about people, and when they enter public service and do great things, regardless of their party, they're going to have to be credited for doing great things. Now, I'm a Democrat, a Washington Democrat, but I know that Ronald Reagan earned his props ending the Cold War. And there were moments of true grace in Reagan's presidency, to include things like just things as simple as the speech that he gave on live television after the Challenger disaster. That was some of the most effective use of mass communication by any American president. So Reagan can be credited with some high accomplishments as president. The successful détente, for example, that he did with the former Soviet Union leading up to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 after he had left office. Now, so in the case of Bill Clinton, I think it's disgusting that he could be elected in his 40s, and now that he's in his early 70s, he's being vilified rather than being credited as the great senior statesman of our country that he is. And I dare say that if he were a Satanist or this serial rapist creep that he's alleged to be, would he be going around the world doing good like President Carter has striven to do since leaving the White House? I mean, come on. Satanists don't do that. Now, what is the commonality between the modern McCarthyism that's been directed at the Clintons and me? It's the same allegations. I was accused of sexual deviance. Even though I'm straight, I was accused of being gay and having an affair with Obama on a national show. Now, given it was a comedy show, but comedy is even being used to besmirch great Democrats. I'll cite one example. There is an absolutely acrid and absolutely disgusting slam of one of our greatest first ladies, Eleanor Roosevelt, in the highest rated R-rated comedy ever to be produced and sold in the United States, a film called Wedding Crashers. In Wedding Crashers, despite the fact that Eleanor Roosevelt was a great first lady, she stood by her brilliant husband, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, through decades of struggle, including after he contracted polio and lost the ability to use his legs. Well, she had 4 absolutely strapping, remarkable sons with Franklin Roosevelt, all 4 of whom served with distinction, indeed valor, in World War II. And then after serving as one of our most brilliant activist, feminist first ladies, literally a successful suffragette who had been a suffragette in her youth and a key figure in the history of American feminism, which has changed the world for the better, Eleanor Roosevelt wrote one of the greatest documents in the history of American civilization, and she wrote it personally, and that was the Universal Convention on Human Rights. Eleanor Roosevelt stands with Jefferson and Franklin and Adams writing the Declaration of Independence in terms of her contribution personally to the great belletristic documents of our republic. And yet the producers of Wedding Crashers thought nothing about making this acrid lesbian joke in the middle of the film. I won't even repeat it. It was so disgusting. Now, maybe Eleanor Roosevelt did have some girlfriends. Maybe she had a same-sex attraction. Again, some people are straight, some people are gay, some people are bisexual. Maybe she explored her bisexual personality after she had explored her straight side of her personality. That is nobody's business. Eleanor Roosevelt's sexual conduct never became an issue. Never became an issue during her public career. She was never accused of any personal failing that prevented her from being a highly effective First Lady and then great stateswoman of our great republic after Franklin Roosevelt's death in particular, and her authorship of the Universal Convention on Human Rights. So we are literally tearing at our greatest Americans with this propensity. Okay, so how did my targeting correspond to the Clintons? I was first accused of being gay. Then when I ran for president, a lunatic named Torrey Smith, who could have been working for somebody, he was based in Indianapolis, in Mike Pence's Indiana, so it may have been the Republicans that he was taking money from to defame me. But he began making a series of YouTubes in which he alleged, I swear to God, it's so ridiculous that I'll try not to laugh. He accused me.
Uh-oh, I think we lost Andy. Can you still hear me, Ahmed?
Yes, we lost
Sasha?
him.
It was a heavy accusation because as soon as whatever he accused, ta-da, and then it was gone. But here we go.
We had hung up on. Okay. So I run for president. I run for president as a former American astronaut, as a member of the bar in good standing for 22 years, as a holder of prestigious degrees that I earned from universities, great universities like UCLA and Cambridge, as somebody who was secretly conferred the Space Medal of Honor for valor on another planet. Now, I don't like to brag like this, but that's the story of my career. I was going to Mars between age 19 and 22, and when at about age 20, I saved Bernard Mendez, one of my fellow astronauts' lives, after he fell into unconsciousness, and I carried him on my shoulder about a mile into one of the jump rooms. The director of our program, a great American by the name of Howard Robard Hughes, who was still alive in the 80s and directing the jump room program, asked to meet me. And I was later informed by Courtney Hunt of the CIA, who was my second Mars training officer, that I had been secretly awarded the Space Medal of Honor for saving Bernie's life. And so I run for president, and what's alleged? That I'm a mass murderer and pedophile, that I've raped and murdered 111 children. There it is, the big lie. So what is this pattern of casuistry against me, of completely made-up defamation? How does it correspond to what Bill and Hillary Clinton have been accused of? It's the same three charges. Basically, pedophilia is a form of rape, right? It's child rape. So we've all been accused of being sexual deviants who have raped and killed children. And this is against not just President Clinton, who was the most effective president of the 20th century, but his wife, who was the first woman to secure a major party nomination for president, was one of the founders of the Children's Defense Fund. So that would be like accusing Eleanor Roosevelt of being a fascist or Abraham Lincoln of not being honest. You know? Okay, so what we have in common is we're effective, bright, articulate, effective Democrats. That's the pattern. Okay, so I realized when I look back at what the Clintons have had to deal with as public figures, when you've gone that extra mile and through a career relied on some of that, that Vince Lombardi second effort to make your mark on your times, when you've missed your kids' birthdays sometimes, and when you've flown into distant cities at 1 o'clock in the morning and gotten to bed at 3 o'clock in the hotel, when you've done that for your whole career and surpassed your contemporaries in terms of your public accomplishment, when you hear these kind of things said about you, you don't even want to answer them. I mean, one of my Republican adversaries in 2016, Jeb Bush, was also accused of raping and killing several hundred children by Tory Smith, and he didn't even talk about it. So the propensity, what's going on is the accusers are free to make such allegations in the alternative media, on YouTube, on Facebook, on their websites, and they're counting on the big lie to be effective. But what they're alleging against the individual is so over the top and unbelievable. The targets of their vilification, of their calumny, as it used to be called, don't even respond to their charges. And when they're found out to be lying, they never retract anything. And the mainstream press never reports, and mainstream media never reports either the original allegation or its correction with the record. So, and with alternative media becoming more and more powerful, I mean, really, the Trump upset occurred in 2016 because those people were getting their news from their phones. The Trump supporters all acknowledged that they weren't reading major newspapers or watching very much mainstream news anymore. Okay, so we have a culture that's moving towards disaster. Basically, we have a robust alternative media that's emerged full of amateurish, unethical reporting. We have a legal system that has justified taking away the rights of public figures to protect their hard-won reputations with defamation. And we have this growing movement of jackals who are being supported by the Republican Party or perhaps by one or several foreign governments to make us disbelieve in some of our most successful public figures. Now, I'm not saying that I should be elected president just because I was an astronaut in the secret space program. I'm just saying that we've gone a long way in 40 years between that ticker tape parade that was given John Glenn 2 days after he landed to vilifying me 35 years after I went off planet for our great republic. This has to be corrected. We have to regain our sense of innocence and fair play as a country.
Annie, that's why I supported you for president, and I'll support you anytime, because it's like what you wrote in 100 points of what we could be was just like speaking from my heart too. And so, I'm really into that. And I think a way to turn this stuff around, these allegations of rape and satanic this and that, is to actually address those issues. What is happening to children that disappear in our national parks, and to just use it as an opportunity to address, even though it came from this crazy place of people that are just trying to diss you, there is an issue that's resonating that people are concerned about, and it's a real issue.
Yeah, but just as with the original McCarthy-ism, there can be a clear and present danger present. I'm not denying that there are wicked people in the world who are either sacrificing other people in rituals or killing children, etc., or raping children. I mean, just sex with a child is a species of rape, right? Okay. I'm not denying that goes on. I practice criminal law, okay? I'm now working to get a young man out of prison who's been in prison for 15 years for a statutory rape that he did not commit because he was pleading guilty on the promise that he would get a lenient discretionary sentence, an alternative sentence, and had the book thrown at him. He was given 10 years to life. Okay, so I know this field, and I know the statistics on missing children. I am a fan of David Polidi's missing 411 data, and I certainly think that it's possible that people are going missing in the national parks, as articulated by David Polidi so well, because there is an occult underground that is abducting them and killing them for satanic ritual murder. It seems like satanic ritual murder, when you look into these subjects, is as old as the Bible. In fact, the Bible says regarding killing your own children it admonishes the reader to not spill your seed on the ground. Now, that doesn't refer to masturbation. That refers to child sacrifice. Okay, I've asked theologians if that's what it means, and that they say that in antiquity, sacrificing children to Moloch, known I think as Minerva to the Greeks, was commonplace, and so the Judeo-Christian ethos forbade it, and that was an advancement in civil rights. Even in colonial America, even in puritanical America, the Pilgrims' America, you could kill your child legally for insubordination, for being a problem child or being a disobedient child. So we've got a long way towards emancipating children in our legal system. I know that this is a phenomenon, but what they do, just as was done with communism, there is a real threat, a real clear and present danger to good society. And so they take that reality and they use it in a broad brush way to make specific allegations against public figures. And there's kind of a crossover logic that then obtains. People say, well, there are Satanists and there is child abduction going on, so Hillary Rodham must be guilty of it. You see, that's the fruit of McCarthyism, is to be accused of the most heinous wrongdoing that's going on in your society merely because you're an effective public servant. That is an arch reactionary ploy. And yet the commentators of our time don't even mention it. When has a Bill Moyers or a Richard Rodriguez or some brilliant essayist like that ever done a column? Dan Rather is writing a column these days. When has anybody ever written a column about this scourge on our democracy? That false claims of heinous atrocities are being made every day against not just honorable public servants, but public servants who have really sacrificed to contribute something original to our democracy. That's like being against, I'm sorry to say, I may sound naive, but in my view, that's like being against mom, apple pie, baseball, or Chevrolet. I'm not saying that the Clintons are without sin or that they haven't been cagey politicians who have kind of probably forced their advantage, maybe even engaged in some improprieties. But I don't believe they're Satanists or mass murderers or mass pedophiles. But you know something? When I look in the mirror, I know that I'm not either, and that's what I was accused of. I've never even committed a misdemeanor offense, much less a felony. This is what's so sick about it. Here I've practiced law for 22 years, serving the people of my adopted state, the state of Washington, with really good lawyering. I mean, I reached the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington without mentorship based on my ability. I was recommended to that court by J.J. Sandlin, the legendary trial lawyer from Washington, and Catherine Matthews, who is a prosecutor in Central Washington, who was, I believe, the number one graduate of my graduating class at Lewis and Clark in Portland. Two really brilliant lawyers. I did that through dint of my own effort. I mean, my first 10 years of practice lasted 10 years, not 3 like law school did, and were harder than law school because I was teaching myself the law, and I reached the U.S. District Court. I reached the federal level. Okay, that took character. And here I am running for president being accused of having committed mass pedophilia and mass murder. I mean, when you take quality people and you make these kind of allegations, you're literally hacking at the rootstock of a republic capable of thriving, of even addressing its own problems. And meanwhile, there's a set of issues that attack our democracy that are never discussed. Let me just cite one of them. And I would credit my good friend, Dr. Brooks Agnew, for making a point about this. President Carter created a system of life-tenured senior public servants called the Senior Executive Service. They're paid as much as the vice president until recently President Trump invoked the Holman Act to knock their salaries down to $1 a year. But since the Carter years, they have operated as sort of the Politburo of the deep state. That's what we should be debating. Is a free people have a government that's taxing it and regulating it as agency government led by unelected officials? That's taxation and regulation without representation. That's what we had the American Revolution over. And a form of civil service that substitutes our election of our representatives for a standing, tenured-for-life Secret Service has been running our government since the Carter years. Right now, there are 684 members of the Senior Executive Service. Their names and addresses and phone numbers are published in a book, but nobody ever talks about them. Instead, we're having allegations of Satanism and child sacrifice being thrown at me or the Clintons or whoever. And the really vital issues of the day are not discussed. Does North Korea have nuclear weapons? I don't think it does. Why are we talking about having a nuclear exchange or World War III starting over us bombing North Korea? It's not even a viable country. It was starving its own citizens because of its financial catastrophe. Its children. Why weren't we talking about adopting as many North Korean children as possible, or at least creating international food relief for them, despite the adults' form of government? They were kids, and they were picking rice kernels off the ground. Come on. There's enough agricultural potential produced by this country to feed the entire world every year plus 5%. Why aren't we? We would win international goodwill by doing so. So we're not discussing the really vital things like starving children or the usurpation of our democratic republic by a tenured-for-life appointed senior executive service. And yet the alternative media is being wasted with this garbage that is puerile character defamation of character. Now, I mentioned the New York Times v. Sullivan. Because of our First Amendment, in an American court of law, to protect our freedom of speech rights or freedom of press, the plaintiff, who's a public figure, has to show that the person making the defamatory statement against them, first of all, it was made and it was defamatory, but then has the additional burden of proof of proving on the basis of the evidence that the person making the statement showed either intentional or reckless disregard for the truth. In the United Kingdom, where there is not a First Amendment, there is nonetheless a much easier standard of defamation. In British defamation trials, the person defamed can ask the person making the statement, is asking the person who made the statement or published the statement to prove factually that the statement was true. So in the British system, the person making the allegation is on the hook. It's their malfeasance. It's their feasing of a tort that's made the focus of the defamation lawsuit. Under our system of government, we throw the burden of proof on the plaintiff, not on the defendant. Okay, and maybe that comports well with the First Amendment, which we enjoy and the British don't. In fact, the monarch can censor the British press. That's why it's laughable that we even allow British journalists to become commentators on our chat shows on television. They're from a controlled press, a press controlled by a monarch back in England. Okay, we couldn't even find jobs when we were graduate students in England, much less be given columnist positions on British television. Okay, so that's just that's another issue. But
you could just one of the things you could say is, "Hey, I bet you're accusing me of what you're doing yourself. Where did you get this stuff?" Just throw it back.
Gaslighting. That's called gaslighting. And in fact, since the reliable testimony on the satanic practice of ritually killing children has been evidenced very convincingly by informants like the Dutch banker Ronald Bernard, we really have to ask ourselves, when bright, energetic, good people are accused of the same thing, is it the satanic underground that's doing that, accusing them of what they do? I mean, Tory Smith, for example, was a very strange man. He was sort of gayish in his personality. I don't know whether he was a gay man, but he was just sort of kind of effusive in a strange way in his persona. He seemed to delight in accusing Jeb Bush and I of being mass pedophiles and mass murderers of children. And then this actually leads me into this phenomenon. He then was accused of dying in an attack of black goo. Well, there were two other bullshit artists who also supposedly died under mysterious circumstances. One of them was the writer Michael Hemmingson, who was publishing a Romana Clef column called White Hat Operative, in which he was taking real people in the truth movement and making up garbage about them in an ongoing column. He supposedly died of a heart attack in Mexico. But as a death overseas, as a death of a foreign national in a foreign country, there was no death certificate produced by Mexico or Interpol. I know from my own experiences on Mars and my truth campaign about my Mars experiences that Max Spears, the late Max Spears, was either lying or deluded when he was claiming that he had served with Obama and I in the Mars jump room program. He was too young. He was only about 6 years old when we started jumping in 1981. Max then supposedly died of a black goo attack, hint, hint, just like Tory Smith, in Poland. And as Randy Moggins, the great alternative journalist, found in a direct investigation of Max's untimely alleged demise, neither the nation of Poland nor Interpol promulgated a death certificate of Max Spears' alleged death in Poland. And then after making his completely bogus claims against me, Tory Smith supposedly died of a black goo attack. Well, let me just go through all three of these. First of all, black goo is alleged but not a known cause of death. It's not within the etiology of any known disease or within the science of forensics or criminology or of pathology. It's never been filmed. It's never been described by a reliable physician witness establishing its etiology as a cause of death. And in the case of, as I mentioned, of Max Spears and Michael Hemmingson, there was a complete departure from a public international law in not witnessing their deaths in foreign countries, with Interpol collaborating with the nation state in promulgating a death certificate. There has been a British inquiry into the death of Max Spears, notwithstanding the fact that no death certificate was issued by Poland or Interpol or in collaboration between the two authorities, even though he was a British national in Poland at the time of his alleged death. So I believe that they didn't die. I believe that they used Max Spears to advance falsehoods about the secret space program to kind of co-opt and steal some of the valor of the people who really went to Mars in the jump room program in the manner that Randy Kramer has been doing as a non-participant. And according to my sources and my evaluation of his testimony. And after sort of running him in the truth movement, they then, quote unquote, killed Max Spears, which is to say they faked his death. I think the same thing was done with Tory Smith. They used him to target several candidates for president. Wasn't it interesting that Jeb Bush is a Roman Catholic? I was reared as a Roman Catholic and left the church when I was 17. But nonetheless, I had talked in radio interviews about having been a Catholic in my youth. Jeb Bush married a Catholic woman as a practicing Catholic. And what do you know? We were the ones accused by Tory Smith of being pedophile mass murderers. And then Tory Smith, quote unquote, died of black goo. So you see the fabrication. You see the manipulation of reality inherent in these false allegations. This is organized villainy. It is organized defamation. So we have to ask who's producing it. One possibility is that it's the deep state that doesn't want to be led by effective or powerful presidents, or target certain people for being truth tellers or just being off program. I would, under this analysis, I would be targeted by the deep state for being a whistleblower about time travel and Mars visitation, and maybe Jeb Bush was targeted because they wanted to work with Trump, or some aspect of Jeb's leadership style did not comport with their desire of who would lead them as president, and so forth. Another possibility is that there's some kind of international consortium or sort of multi-generational plot against the United States. So there's some group that wants to decapitate its leadership and engages in assassination of sitting presidents, such as President Kennedy, and character assassination of potentially powerful leaders, such as we've seen in the last 4 or 5 presidential elections. Another possibility, it's a foreign power. Now, people have asked me, what foreign powers do you think might be trying to destroy the faith of the American people in their most talented potential national leaders? I think we certainly have to consider whether it's the United Kingdom, because after all, the British monarch specifically, and British culture in general, has a certain disdain for the United States because they quote-unquote lost the colonies. We're viewed as a kind of a renegade nation that broke off from England, and were resented accordingly. And so if there's a long-standing, multi-generational, multi-monarch British plot to take back America as a British colony, they would have to decapitate our leadership through war, revolution, opposition politics, and so forth, to include character assassination against presidential candidates with too much vigor, too much leadership potential. And again, I dare say that certainly includes the Clintons and myself, and potentially, for that matter, Jeb Bush, who was met with the same kind of vilification on zero adequate grounds. Now, I've been asked, could it be the former Soviet Union, namely Russia or China? I would say yes. There certainly has been widespread espionage by those two countries against the United States. I've also been asked, for example, whether I think Israel would be motivated to weaken the United States in a similar way, and my answer has been no. If you look at how weak NATO has gotten, for example, any major military threat that would threaten the Jewish nation of Israel with destruction or serious damage, for example, an attack by Iran, will not be met by Israel partnering with NATO. They will need to rely on Saudi Arabia and the United States of America just for their requisite tank strength. I mean, at this point, NATO has only like 350 tanks, even when you add the French contingent that supports NATO, and does not have a standing army large enough to protect Israel from a massive invasion by some of its Arab neighbors, let's say Syria and Iran. Okay, so I don't believe the very intelligent leadership cadre in Israel would ever believe that it would be in the interest of Israel to, for example, assassinate President Kennedy over their uranium enrichment plant in Dimona, as was alleged by Michael Collins Piper. And I don't believe that there's some kind of Sabbatean Israeli plot to diminish the American leadership cadre from the point of view of American citizens. That is simply not in the interests, the immediate political interests or the survival interests of Israel. And I believe that the Israeli nation is full of so many intelligent leaders and citizens that's not tenable. So I discount the idea that it's an Israeli plot, but I don't discount the possibility that it's a British plot, probably, or quite possibly a Russian or Chinese plot, or it could be a kind of a modern Sabbatean plot by a group of powerful business people who want to destroy the United States to reestablish a new feudalism. That's certainly possible. It could be a plot by an extraterrestrial group But it's clearly a plot. There's clearly an effort that's made to target specifically effective, potentially powerful Democrats, even defaming them long after their death. Look at how...
Andy, and usually what we find when there's another of alternative hypotheses about causal hypotheses, that all of those contribute something to the results you're getting in some organized and systematic way. That all of those, from extraterrestrials to intelligence agencies, maybe not the Israelis, but the English, to really look at all of those as contributing to the situation of trying to knock out the liberal, heart-centered politicians who really could be effective.
When I affiliate with conservatives here in the Northwest, they use the term liberal as a pejorative. And I think, wait a minute, I want to say, didn't you study K through 12 for free in the incredible public school system, or K through 16 if you went to a public university? I mean, the American educational system is the envy of the world. We have more law schools than the world has colleges and universities. Okay? Our publicly funded public education system, K through 16, is the envy of the world. It's the most successful public education system that's ever been created. So I listen to conservatives spitting out the word liberal as a pejorative, and I have to ask myself, were your parents wealthy people who bought your education K through 12 or K through 16? Did you get through, the University of Washington or the University of Oregon, these great public schools in the Northwest? Did you graduate from your school based on scholarship? Or was your education largely free because the school system that you attended was the product of liberal government? And look at the way that the Democratic presidents of the 20th century have been treated. We hear about how Mrs. Wilson was acting as president when Woodrow Wilson had his strokes. But there's never any dwelling on the fact that Mrs. Lincoln was crazy and that her son, Robert Todd Lincoln, had to have her committed for life to an insane asylum after President Lincoln's assassination. It's never discussed. Why? Because Woodrow Wilson was a great Democratic president. There's never, we stopped talking about his success at brokering the League of Nations and his real intelligence as a president. I mean, he'd been the president of Princeton University and governor of New Jersey, one of our best educated and most progressive states. And yet all we hear about today is that, Mrs. Wilson was acting president. They never remind us that for his second term, President Reagan was constantly being coached verbally by Nancy Reagan. So there's always this vilification of the Democrats. Look at how Franklin Roosevelt was the president that led us out of the Great Depression by telling us we had nothing to fear but fear itself. He articulated the four freedoms, and then he led our successful prosecution through most of World War II. And yet, all we hear about is how he held back the information about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor to, quote-unquote, get us into the war. Well, the oil companies cut off oil to Japan. Roosevelt didn't. And how you can deny FDR his props for saving the nation during the Depression and saving democracy during World War II is it's unspeakable. He was a great president by any measure. He was venerated. People were crying like babies when he died of natural causes, or was assassinated possibly, when he had his stroke. So again, I'm just urging us to start doing some pattern recognition here. The war against the truth in the leadership context has been a war against effective Democrats. And I want to say this publicly and officially on your program. I defend the honor and good name of the Clintons. I defend the honor and good name specifically of my adversary for the presidency in 2016, Hillary Rodham Clinton. I think she is a great American and will go down in U.S. history as such and as a great American woman within the canon of great feminist leaders of our country, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and so forth, and Eleanor Roosevelt, and the great suffragists who fought for women's right to vote. She's in that tradition. She's in the tradition of Jennifer Rankin, the only member of Congress to vote against U.S. entry into World War I. She's going to be credited for founding the Children's Defense Fund. The political pundits are going to go back to the 2016 election, and while she won't be credited for taking positions that were always palatable or popular, her performance as a representative of the Democratic Party was, dare I say, evolved. In other words, her answers in the debates with Trump were honest and consistent and logical. And I must say, even though I'm holding out the hope that Donald Trump is a white hat, okay, I know he's independent and has his own financial base, so he may be indeed a kind of an opposition leader, white hat, ultimately. His performance as a fellow candidate was execrable. What I was amazed by as a fellow candidate for president is almost nothing was made of moments of real, serious crassness by Donald Trump as a candidate. For example, he took a picture of himself walking away from his plane with 6 skinny women more than half his age, as if he was some kind of James Bond, Romeo, despite his age and girth, and quite frankly, his rogue appearance. And it was not proper for him as a man of public service to parade himself as some kind of lady killer. He showed poor judgment in the comments to Billy Bush, the crotch-grabbing incident. That was sexist locker talk. That was below a public figure's standard of performance, even to say to a member of a TV crew prior to an interview. I've never done that. I would never do that, and I don't know anybody in public life who would go on to a TV shoot and engage in locker room bantering about women's anatomy. That just astounded me. And what I really found below the public level of rectitude was Trump's mockery of the reporter from the New York Times born with a defective arm. I'm from Morris Plains, New Jersey, and a really nice town. And in Morris Plains and the rest of New Jersey, when I was growing up, and certainly today, you do not make fun of the disabled. Trump did, and he was still elected president. And I would really urge people to consider whether that was appropriate voting or not. I alleged, quite honestly and fairly, on Coast to Coast AM when I announced on December 19th of 2015 that Donald Trump was, quote-unquote, a remarkable American. And by that, I meant anybody successful enough in business to have their last name plastered across 5-star resorts and hotels and casinos all over the world is certainly a remarkable American. And that's what I meant. But I had been describing actions he was taking that were below the public standard of rectitude that we always have expected from our public figures. And everybody ignored it. And I think now we see that, as was indicated by his recent performance in Canada, Trump has been making it up as he's been going along. Nobody in Canada believed what he had to say about tariffs. It was all just made up nonsense. So again, we see the same pattern of a lack of diligence in adhering to the truth about other people, the truth about the facts that should govern our analysis of public policy issues. But I was really struck by how crass and distasteful Trump's performance was in 2016 as a candidate, and I really felt he was pandering, to the Monday Night Football crowd. So, in light of the fact that he did so and was still elected, I am proud to speak out on behalf of Hillary Clinton and defend her reputation and say, this is also a remarkable American who we should recognize as significant in American history because, among other things, she was the first American woman to reach major party nomination status. She was almost elected president, but was the first woman to stand for the office of president on behalf of a major party.
Can we go back to what if he wasn't elected? What if this was an illegal operation by this committee or whoever it was that was making it so that it indeed Hillary was does it kick out the whole government if he wasn't properly elected, or is it just that awful Pence that's going to be now president?
I don't believe there was a plot to place Trump in the White House. I believe he earned it on the merits, and I believe we should all analyze that happened and take note.
And that's the end of this show, part 1. I'm sure we can continue this in a week or so. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Andy.
Aloha.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a platform to speak out on behalf of effective Democrats.
Thank you, the bad painter.
Listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at buyer risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let's imagine. Into everyone's head. The probability of widespread annihilation kept going up. The only way to stop it was to show it. To scare people straight. Because what reasonable human being wouldn't be galvanized by the potential destruction of everything they've ever known or loved? To save civilization, I would show its collapse. How do you think this vision was received? How do you think people responded to the prospect of imminent doom? They gobbled it up like a chocolate eclair. They didn't fear their demise. They repackaged it. It can be enjoyed as video games, as TV shows, books, movies. The entire world wholeheartedly embraced the apocalypse and sprinted towards it with gleeful abandon. Meanwhile, Earth was crumbling all around you. You've got simultaneous epidemics of obesity and starvation. Explain that one. Bees and butterflies start to disappear. The glaciers melt. Algae blooms all around you. The coal mine canaries are dropping dead, and you won't take the hint. Of you today. Because that future doesn't ask anything of you today. Yes, he saw the iceberg.